Hello, everyone. So today we are going to get into the achievements of the Songhai and some of their legacies as well. So let's jump right into it. Whoa, jumping a little extra here. Here we go. Let's start it off with art and architecture. Really a big hallmark of this particular area. Mosques are going to be the big thing. Lots of mosque building with the African twist, like you see with the Mosque of Djenne and other places that we've discussed previously, but very important to have places of worship and things like that. Ceramics, jewelry, and weaving, as on the left here, you see some great example of the weaving. And on the right is an example of some of the metal sculptures that you'll see. So the top is actually some of the wood carving, and on the bottom right, one of the traditional masks, which I'll actually talk about the religious links to those as well. But lots of craftsmen. These were big things that were being traded regularly. And in most of the major cities, you had groups of artisans and craft guilds, just like you saw the development of the guilds in Europe. You see the development of the guilds in this area as well. Trade, of course, was massive, okay? And the big focus is controlling the trans-Saharan trade, and we'll be talking about that trade much more in depth in some future videos that I have here. And their major cities were the center of this. And a lot of people, when they look at Africa today, or they think one of the stereotypes is Africa doesn't have a lot of cities, and that's just not the case. I mean, you literally have cities everywhere. We see the size of the Songhai Empire, but you see all the cities that are able to link these things together. And so tons of routes. I'll be talking about the specific things as well, but you see some examples of, we've got gold and salt, copper, cloth, swords, all sorts of things, glass work. And we see lots of different coins, as you see here, a Moroccan coin that was used to trade in Songhai. And you're a pretty expansive place. And we found in this region different coins from different areas of the world. And these cities really were incredible. Here is an example of the outside of, or actually one of the center mosques of a city. It's a very, very cosmopolitan. You'd see people from Arabia, Italy. There was a Jewish population that was in some areas, particularly like Timbuktu. Timbuktu, Djenne, and Gao are the biggest of the cities. Mosques and schools were some of the central features and some of the largest buildings that they had. Again, that gives you an idea of the importance. And the makeup of these buildings, many were built from stone, some mud bricks. They had large open squares. There were open markets. And around the cities would be suburbs, houses that were mostly made of mud and reeds. They tended to focus on agriculture, but it was very similar to what you see today, in places like the United States. We have that central city, right? And then as you go further out from the city, you have the suburban area. It's not quite as built up, right? There aren't quite as many people. And West Africa under the Songhai was no different. Trade goods, what do we have here? Salt. I've been talking about salt in Africa forever. There are some giant pieces of salt. We know the importance. Cloth, glassware, sugar, and horses were some other things, because once they started getting horses in, they did have horse breeding. What are they importing? They're importing gold, ivory, things, spices, cola nuts, animals, animal hides, and slaves. Again, you do have a fair amount of slavery in this region. We've kind of talked about it before. We'll continue talking about it, but not uncommon, unfortunately. They also did a lot of maritime trade because they had a presence on the coast. They did engage in it, sailing around the edge of West Africa, and then they'd access the Mediterranean Sea as well. So again, really, really expansive trade here. The societal structure was kind of interesting. The occupations were actually determined by your clan group, and then everything was hereditary. So there were noblemen who were the direct descendants of the Songhai of Gao, and they were the ones that ran everything, right? And you're basically born into your job. Under the noblemen and the government officials, you had your freemen and traders. Then you had your craftsmen, which again, as I mentioned, were part of guilds. So it was very organized and working as your early unions. And at the end, you had slaves, many of which were actually from Europe, and war captives at the bottom. And that structure was pretty set. There really wasn't any type of movement. When we look at the gender issues, it's interesting what we see here. So men control the government and marriage. Okay, marriage is arranged by fathers and prospective grooms only. Men can have multiple wives. However, and women, they were involved in mat making and mat, M-A-T, as well as other weaving, which again, what we need to understand, that was a really, really big thing. That was a part of their cultural identification, as well as a big part of trade. So that is important. It's not just like this women's work kind of concept, as well as ceramics. And they did live in very separate spheres. Some homes would have places for where the women would be and where the men would be. They would often eat separately, but they had some really interesting things here. They kept their own stuff, meaning that women, the things that they brought into the family, yes, could be used for the family, but they technically belonged to the women. Women also had inheritance rights. In other words, if someone in their family died and passed things down to them, that would go to the woman. It would not be immediately transferred to her husband. Earning and keeping income. Women could work. There were some craftsman jobs that women did, and they did not, like in other places in the world, legally, men controlled all income. In other words, like you couldn't, even if you earn the income yourself, the men still controlled the income. And in this case, that was not actually the case. Women could actually get divorces here. And the interactions were interesting. The cultural thing is that in public, that women should act almost shy and in some cases deferential. But they looked at the Quran a little bit differently. So in this particular case, when they looked at those ideas of modesty, it's about, yes, covering certain things, but we don't necessarily have the hijabs here. We don't have burqas here. Men are very much taught to be respectful of women, and that is a way to uphold the message of Islam. So it's really, really interesting. Now, do they have political power? No. They still, all the arranged marriage and things like that. But in this particular case, you saw a little bit more of freedom and opportunity for women than you did in many other places. Now, Islam is hugely important. It was the main religion, but not necessarily the state religion, which I'll get into. There's still some local religions that will be respected, that Islam is on the top, and we can see that by building of lots of mosques and things like that. Most notably was when King Muhammad actually went on the Hajj, which again was very difficult from all the way in West Africa. They did employ Sharia law, but the interesting thing was the protection of local beliefs. So Islam is really what you saw in the cities. But out in the rural regions, native beliefs were really still respected and permitted to worship. And that is when we get into this group of religious beliefs known as animism. And this is really important. And the idea of animism is that spirits possess certain objects, particularly things like trees and caves and other natural features. And in some case, this extends to the existence of spirits in all living things. And so the idea comes here is that the world is actually connected, that your spirit and the spirit of gods, if you will, inhabit the earth. And many scholars actually look at this as what we think the world's earliest religions were, because animism, in all likelihood, from some archaeologic finds that we have, easily goes back tens of thousands of years. Now, this varies on place to place. We're focusing a little bit more on West Africa here. And the spirits, basically the views on the spirits, you need to do things to keep them in a good mood, along with the spirits of your ancestors, and we'll talk about that. And as a result, they will help you thrive. And so many beliefs circle around the idea that the spirits are often housed in totems, and that those totems is you make a totem out of a particular source of a spirit, the plant or animal that the totem was created from, and people will keep those totems in specific spots in cities or even their homes. Lots of ceremonies honoring the gods with food and drink and dancing, because it is believed that the spirits like this, and that's what keeps them in a good mood to send you blessings. And often you see masks and things like that associated with the representation of these spirits. That's why the mask building in West Africa is of particular importance. One, it is a great way of artistic expression, but as well as that, it is a way that we are going to please the gods. And you also have a group of priests and sorcerers whose job it was to guide people in the proper practices. And their job is also to limit the impact of evil spirits. And there are things and ceremonies that you can do to banish and get rid of evil spirits as well. And on the bottom there is one of those priests. And as a result, one of the big things we see here is a big emphasis on environmentalism and environmental protection, because the spirits are in nature and thus we must protect it. So animism is a really interesting set of beliefs. You see it in all different places in the world, and it was something that, along with Islam, still was a major focus of this empire. So hopefully you learned a little bit about the kind of the cultural things going on in the Songhai, and I appreciate you guys coming. Take care.